So all the brads started hitting the rubber on the tires, and we drove about 3 miles out of town and had 2 blowouts. Now, there's a blizzard going on, and we had, it was a mess. It was the biggest mess in the world. So we finally go back. We had to spend the night in Raton, New Mexico, buying new tires for the car. Of course, I didn't have any money. So I don't even remember how I did it. And we ultimately got to Denver, I guess, the next day. And the headline of the newspaper said, "Worst blizzard in 40 years hits Denver." I think Aunt Barbara still got it someplace.
How long were you in Denver?
We were in Denver for a little over a year.
Mm-hmm.
Stayed there while we got those stores pretty well put into shape and so forth. And then we moved back to Dallas in 1956. Getting back to my military situation, this is kind of interesting. My deferment now got canceled or expired in May of 1955. And it was at that time I was living in Denver, so we called my draft board, told them I was now in Denver. So they transferred my file to Denver. And it was, I think, in December of '55 that they finally called me for my physical examination. And to pass a physical examination for the draft in 1955, if you could walk in the door, you were 1A, you know, and of course I was 1A. And then Aunt Barbara became pregnant just a few months later, and I advised my draft board that I was going to be a father, and they reclassified me to a classification called 1D from 1A, which was ready for the draft. 1D is deferred because they weren't drafting fathers, and I never went into the service.
That's a great story. You spent your career with Zale Corp until?
Well, I started my career at Zale Corporation, I guess, when my daddy opened the store in Wichita Falls.
Uh-huh.
And we used to all go to the store all the time. The store was just part of our life. And when we moved to Dallas, I would go to the office on Saturday and work Saturday morning, and then go to a store on Saturday afternoon. It's interesting, we were just talking about this the other day, that we had a store in Oak Cliff. It was the corner of Jefferson and Zang's, and we had a wonderful, wonderful store manager there, a guy by the name of Sheryl Shackman.
Mm-hmm.
Sheryl Shackman should have been the mayor of Oak Cliff. Everybody in Oak Cliff absolutely loved Harold, as I did. And he still has family here in town. And, I used to work for Harold. And then we opened a store on Grand Avenue, and I remember I used to go out there on Grand Avenue in the afternoons and work there. And this was while I was in high school. So when I worked during the summer also. This was kind of an interesting story. In the summer, I think of 1950, Zale Corporation put in one of the first profit-sharing plans that corporations were allowed to establish. There was a new tax law that allowed us to do that. I think it was in 1950 or 51. And I was working at the office, and I remember there was an attorney by the name of Vester Hughes, who's still here today, who wrote our profit-sharing plan. And I designed a video for the stores. Now, the video for the stores in 1951 was a lot different than what you had today. We had a little slide projector. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember slide projectors?
Oh, sure.
Sure, little 35mm slides. And they would go into a cassette that would fit into a projector. And then we had a little tape recorder. And the tape recorder would have the audio, and when you would get to a beep on the tape recorder, you'd click to the next slide. That was the high-tech system that we had. And so I designed the program for explaining this profit-sharing plan to all of our employees in the stores. So we would send a projector and the little group of slides and the tape for a tape player out to the stores, and they could explain this profit-sharing system to their employees. And then I did the first year that we had profit sharing, and this was all by hand. You had to do this. We had all the employees listed, and you had to find out how long they'd all been there and exactly what their pay was. And then you gave each, you would allocate a certain amount of profit sharing to each store, and then allocate it to each employee based on their various factors, you know, pay and length of service and all that kind of stuff, and did all that by hand. And then posted it by hand in a big book, big ledger book. And I was doing this long before I went off to college. When I got to college, well, accounting was like shooting fish in a barrel for me. I mean, it was just nothing to it because I'd been doing it. And I was very familiar with all the terminology and all this kind of stuff. When I came back to Dallas from Denver, it was in 1956. Now, I was the grand age of 23 at the time. Well, Ben Lipshe and M.B. Zale had begun considering taking Zale Corporation public. And this was going to be a big undertaking. And they found an underwriter, a company, a local firm by the name of Epler, Guerin, and Turner. Dean Guerin, still to this day a very dear friend of ours. And they agreed that they would be our underwriters and they would sell Zale Corporation stock public. And Ben Lipshe and MB had me doing a lot of the grunt work on preparing for this public offering. And we had to have an outside auditors, which was a big deal for us at the time. And just remember, this was long before computers and automated bookkeeping and records and so forth, and all this stuff was done by hand. We had, every store had its own accounts receivable because we sold on credit. And each store manager was allowed to extend credit, and then we had to go in and audit those terms and audit each individual account. Many of the customers would come in once a week and pay cash as a deposit on their account. So it was kind of an interesting time that people today can't really appreciate because you just weren't there to see it.
So how long did you spend doing that? How did you, tell me what happened next after you worked on taking the company public? What were some of your other roles?
You know that, Sheryl, I've often been astonished when I think back of what M.B. Zale and Ben Lipshe had me doing. I'm not sure that I would have had the courage to turn over some of the things that they did to me.
I'm sure they had a lot of confidence.
Well, they had confidence in all of us kids, and they put us in way over our head, essentially, and let you sink or swim. But I was involved in a lot of acquisitions with your father, Leo.
Leo Fields.
Leo Fields, right. And we also got involved in the international aspects of our company because the jewelry business, even then in the 50s and 60s, much of our product was imported. As you can imagine, diamonds all come from elsewhere. Most precious stones do. So that we had to have international capability in order to get those products if we were going to acquire them economic, to our economic benefit.
Sure.
And so that early on, we were developing an international capability, which really puts a different complexion on the organization structure that you have to have. We had extensive merchandising activities in New York, as you know, and my brother, Marvin Zale, was essentially in charge of all of that, as well as most of our international activities. Your dad was in charge of a lot of the merchandising and the better quality jewelry stores, which now today the Bailey Banks and Biddle chain, which the company has recently sold. And I just, I guess, spent the bulk of my time in managing a lot of the growth of the company, real estate activities, the financing, logistics of supplying the stores, things of that nature, and just a lot of the administrative other things it takes to run a company.
And when was the company sold?
Company was sold in 1986. We went through the equivalent of about a 5-year hostile takeover. We had a group in Canada that started buying our stock in 1981. And they were a very small company to incur major undertakings such as acquiring a major percentage of Zale Corporation was way beyond their financial capacity. And that concerned us because we didn't want to have a lot of our shareholdings in a very weak financial position. And so we were aggressive in trying to get them to not injure the company. And we had entered into legal agreements where essentially they agreed not to acquire more stock. And that lasted for about 4 or 5 years, and then they got a partner who had a lot of resources, a lot of financial resources, and made an offer to buy all of the company out, and that was closed in December of 1986. A great tribute to the company was that it lasted for 5 years under their management before it went bankrupt. It was really a marvelous company, and the way they managed it was just absolutely ridiculous. It was the handwriting was on the wall when you the first 30 days that they came in. But as I say, the company lasted for 5 years, and then since then, unfortunately, it's gone through a series of management changes that just seems to be continuing forever. Just this last week, they changed the CEO again. And I was counting, I think there's probably been 10 CEOs since we sold that business. And before that, let's see, the company was started in 1924, so it was sold in 86. That's 62 years. I think there had been 3 CEOs in the 62 years, and there have been 10 since then.
That's really something.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but...
But you were able then to pick up the pieces and move on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And...
you know, I got real lucky, Sheryl. When we sold the company in 1986, I had to sign what's called a covenant not to compete, which essentially pushed me out of the jewelry business for 5 years. I could have no investment in the jewelry business, couldn't take a job, couldn't do anything in the jewelry business. And having never done anything else, it was being a real fish out of water kind of a situation. But I got very, very lucky. The day after it was announced that Zale Corporation was being sold, I got a phone call from Dr. Charles Sprague at UT Southwestern Medical School. And I'll never forget it. He said to me, he said, I don't know what's going on at your company, but I read about it this morning in the newspaper. He says, and I have an office for you here at Southwestern Medical School, and I want you to come over here in office with me. And I said to him, Dr. Sprague, I'm just flattered and I'm surprised and I'm honored that you would do that. I can promise you I will not move in with you, but I will come see you. And I went over there after the 1st of February or so, and he told me that the chairman of their new referral hospital that was yet to be built wanted to retire. His name was Ralph Rogers. Marvelous, marvelous man. Ralph Rogers was a real fixture in Dallas and a mover and shaker. He had started a company called TXI, which is probably the largest cement maker in the country, if not the world. And Ralph wanted to retire as chairman, and he asked if I would be chairman. And I told him that I would if they would help me do it, because I didn't know anything about building a hospital. And I got to meet a whole new circle of people, but more importantly, I got to do something that was worthwhile doing. You know, I had something that I could really work on. Because if you've been working all your life and then all of a sudden you get up one morning, you don't have an office to go to, you don't have anything to do, that's pretty tough. Somebody once said that, you know, you're a racehorse and you can't all of a sudden just stop, and you can't. Your father is the same way. He can't stop, and I have no intention of retiring.
How long did it take to build the hospital?
We built the hospital. That's a wonderful question. We broke ground in July of 1987, and we opened in November of '89. We opened about 6 months ahead of schedule and $3 million under budget. And I have to give credit for that to a guy by the name of Dr. Skip Garvey, who was the president of that hospital at the time.
And this is the Zale Hospital?
This is Zale University Hospital. It is a referral hospital at UT Southwestern. By the way, the first operation when we opened the doors in 1989 was a 14-hour aneurysm done by Dr. Duke Sampson. We were just talking about this the other day. I mean, when we turned the lights on, we did a 14-hour aneurysm operating.
That's a big step. I see we're about out of time on this tape. Why don't we take a little break?
Okay.
Okay. So, you were saying... So
that essentially, it really just kind of boils down to three things for me. Is the only person you really need to satisfy is yourself. That's number one. You got to be proud of what you do. You got to be proud of how you conduct yourself. You have to be proud of the actions you take. You're the only one who really knows whether or not they're right or wrong. And I'm convinced of that most people do know the difference between right and wrong.
Sure.
And they're the only ones that they have to convince. Secondly, you got to love what you do. You just have to love what you do. You got to be excited about going to work in the morning. Your Aunt Barbara said to me one night, I came home and I guess I had a big grin on my face, and she said, well, what's going on? And I said, you know, today we just hired our 1,000th employee at Blockbuster. And she said, I thought you weren't going to do that again. And then I started giving her my speech. I said, you know, but think about this. Here's 1,000 people that we have working in these Blockbuster video stores. And they're servicing our customers. And they're giving our customers the best deal in entertainment that they can get. We're renting them a video for $3 or $3.50 for 3 days for a first-run movie for their whole family. And what a great value this is. And I said, besides that, these are people who are working. and they're paying taxes, and they're supporting their families. And she says, it's just impossible. You know, you're consumed with business. I said, I guess I am, but I enjoy it. That's what I love doing. And that's what's important to me, is that I'm doing something that's worthwhile doing. I'm not just down here trying to make a buck, which we do, but we're servicing a customer. We're giving them something that they haven't had before. We're employing people. We're giving them an opportunity to make an honest living. And hopefully what we're doing will also benefit us. But that's what I love to do in life. And so this is, you know, my philosophy is I'm the happiest guy there ever was, because I love doing what I'm doing.
Isn't that terrific?
And then I love to give back. I mean, how much do we need? We don't need that much. And so if you've got more than what you need, give it away. But make certain that when you do, it's something worthwhile. And it doesn't make any difference what it is. And if you don't have money to give of yourself. Give of your time. Help some kid out, or do whatever you can. But to give back. So if you can protect your integrity, and you can love what you do in life, and you can give back, as far as I'm concerned, you hit a home run.
That sounds like wonderful words to live by.
It works for me.
Absolutely. What are some of the things that you've been involved in leading up to? You were talking a little bit earlier about the Zale Hospital. What are some of the things that you've been involved in over the years?
Well, when I was at Zale Corporation, quite honestly, we had an entirely different outlook on most of our charitable activities.
In what way?
We tried to do things that would somehow or another represent our customer base. We didn't want to be involved in all Jewish activities, because MB used to say, quite honestly, he was right. I mean, we didn't have only Jewish customers. We had blacks, we had Hispanics, we had Episcopalians and Catholics and so forth. And so consequently, we really should respect all of those entities and do the best we could to participate with them. And that was the primary rationale for the kinds of activities that the Zale Foundation worked with during those years when I was at Zale Corporation. When we left Zale Corporation, we had, I think, an entirely different goal that we had to set, because Zale Corporation served not only the purposes of its shareholders, employees, and constituents, but it also had a tendency to keep our family cohesive, because we were all pretty good shareholders in the company itself. Well, now that we no longer had that, we then had the opportunity to take the Zale Foundation. We renamed it the MB and Edna Zale Foundation. And we said, we can use this not only as our vehicle to give back, but to get our entire family involved in philanthropy, and hopefully, as another benefit, to keep our family cohesive. And
I think you're doing a real good job of that.
It seems to me as though we've really done a good job of that. I think you're right. I think we've done as good a job as could be expected. Our family is extended from Florida to New York to Portland, Oregon to North Carolina and Houston, and we're in Louisiana, and
keeping us together. We're on in the Sheryl Fields Bogan and Don Zale again, and we are talking about the family foundation and how great it's been of keeping our family as a cohesive unit. And you were just saying that we have family from everywhere, from New York to Portland, Oregon, and it's an opportunity to bring us all together.
You know, it is, and getting our family involved in giving back has just been, it's been one of the greatest pleasures I've had of my adult life. And I guess I'm an adult, I'm not quite sure whether I am or not, but seeing the family come together to allocate its resources to programs that are all exceptional programs, and to hear them interact, and to see them all really wanting to do what is right, has just been a glorious achievement from what I see.
Give us a little bit of a history of the Family Foundation.
The Zale Foundation, as it began, it was called the Zale Foundation. I think it was established in early 1950s. And it was established by M.B. Zale at Zale Corporation, and it served really a couple of purposes. Primary purpose was that really all these things were tax driven, if you think about it. The tax laws allowed you to make a contribution to a private foundation, have a deduction for it, and then to give those resources to 501c3 or qualified charities over a period of time, so that it was very, very convenient for people who at the year end, or for whatever reason, they wanted to make a charitable contribution but didn't have a specific entity in mind. They could essentially put that money into a foundation whose purposes were dedicated to that, and then ultimately figure out where it was going to go. And that happened throughout the entire country. I mean, many foundations like this all over.
Did MB involve you at an early age? You were in your 20s when he started this, or was it something that he did himself at the beginning?
At the very beginning, this was something that was done before me. I became involved with their charitable activities right after I came back to Dallas from Denver, Colorado in 1956, I guess it was. There was a new college that was being built in Dallas by the name of Bishop College. And Bishop College was going to be predominantly black, if not exclusively black. And there was a very prominent Baptist family in town. It was headed by a gentleman named Carr Collins. And they had an extensive interest in insurance and banking and things of that nature. And Carr Collins was quite a guy. And when they decided to build a Bishop College, which was Baptist affiliated, in South Dallas, I remember distinctly, he came to see M.B. Zale and Ben Lipsky, and he said, this was his way of fundraising. He said, we're building a college, and we're going to have a library out there, and the name of the library is going to be the Zale Library. Whether you want it or not, it's going to have your name on it. So what do you want to give us? And I remember they gave him $250,000 at the time, which was a lot of money. You're talking about the middle 50s, I guess it was.
I bet that was a whole lot of money.
Yeah, it was a whole lot of money. And so the MB and Ben became involved in that from the periphery and from a support standpoint, and they said, well, look, what we would like to do is establish a scholarship loan fund. And they sent the college, I think it was $5,000 or $10,000 or whatever it was, and the concept was that the administration would make loans to students, and as those loans were repaid, well, it would replenish the fund, and they would make more loans and so forth. And so Ben Lipshin and B. Zale, after the fund was established and was open for about a year, they said to me one day, so why don't you take a run out there and see how that fund's doing? So I go out to Bishop College and I say, well, you know, I'd like to see the records on this fund, and I would like to see who the students are, how they're doing, blah, blah, blah. They couldn't show me anything. $10,000 just disappeared. You know, they could show you where they gave out the money, but they didn't know who they gave it to or anything.
Bad record
Yeah, they had zero record keeping.
Mm-hmm.
So, and now I was very young when this was going on. I was about 24 years old. So I said to the president of the school at the time, I said, Dr. Curry, I said, if you would like to have some bookkeeping courses or something like that taught out here, because they needed bookkeeping very badly, I said, I would be happy to help you. And I said, and I have some friends. I had a friend who was an attorney, Morty Lewis, married to my cousin Barbara Lipshy. I said, and he would teach a business law course out here at night school.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Dr. Curry, a very precise gentleman, considered himself to be a distinguished educator, said, well, you know, we have to have only professors who are accredited. And he said, and what would your compensation demands be? And I said, well, Dr. Curry, we volunteer. He said, well, we can get you accredited. Since we told we didn't want any money, we got us accredited. Anyway, so I started going out there teaching night school. And this was before we had expressways. I lived off of Midway Road and Walnut Hill Lane. And Bishop College was way past Beltline in South Dallas. And so I used to go from our offices, 512 South Ackerd, which is today where the City Hall is. I would drive out there on the city streets to Bishop College, and I would teach night school from 7 to 10, and then I would drive all the way back out to Midway Road and Walnut Hill Lane. And it would take, you know, it was a schlep. And Barbara used to worry about me and so forth because it was dark and blah, blah. And my most memorable evening out there, they were having sit-ins then. If you remember, sit-ins and demonstrations on college campuses were very prevalent during that time. And they were having sit-ins and demonstrations at Bishop College for whatever reason, I don't remember. And I used to go to the student cafeteria for dinner. And I would be the only white person in there, and I'd get my little meal, and I'd go sit down at a table with the students, and they were all thought I was crazy. And I would go to my class, and I used to have the same speech ready for them, you know, first of every semester. Look, I'm volunteering my time. I don't know anything about the politics of what's going on out here. I don't know anything about the racial issues. Only thing I know is we're going to learn something about a bookkeeping course. This is what I was teaching. I said, so I don't have time for any demonstrations or sit-ins or stand-ins or any eruptions. If you're going to come in here, we're going to go to work, and let's don't worry about any of that other BS. And I never had a problem. And I used to walk through, you know, and they'd have all their demonstrations and all that stuff. I never paid any attention to it. Just went straight on to my class. And my kids did pretty well. And I did that for a few years. And then Bishop College, ultimately, we got through the foundation, through the Zale Foundation, we got them to hire some exceptional people. They got their business office straightened out. We had them hire the equivalent of a dean who came in to begin to get the academic program straightened out. And then Mr. Collins called me one day and he said, we have just had a board meeting and you have been elected to the board. My goodness, here I was like 26, 27 years old. My gosh, that's unbelievable. I'm on the board of a college. I couldn't believe that. It was a big deal. And so then he calls back and he says, and guess what? I said, what's that, Mr. Collins? He says, they elected you chairman of the finance committee. Wow. I mean, that was really an honor. The next morning,
I know where this is going.
Yeah.
The next morning, I come to the office, 512 South Ackerd, and I get there, I guess about 7 o'clock in the morning. I turn on the light in the waiting room, and there's a black gentleman there. And I said, good morning. And I said, can I do something for you? He said, yes, I'm here to see Mr. Donald Zale. And I said, well, that's me. And he said, well, my name is Chester Corzine. I said, well, good to meet you, Mr. Corzine. He said, yes. He says, I'm the chief financial officer at Bishop College. I said, well, that's wonderful. He said, are you the new chairman of the finance committee? I said, yes, I am. He said, well, I need to talk to you. So, well, come on back. We'll have a cup of coffee. Walk on back. Sits there. He says to me, he said, Mr. Zale, said, we're overdrawn $600,000. What would you like for me to do about that? Well, welcome to the NFL. You know, here I am. I haven't been to my first meeting yet. Now, the guy comes in and tells me he's overdrawn $600,000. It was a mess. But that's kind of how you learn. You know, you go through your baptism under fire. So Mr. Corzine and I started working on where the bodies were buried out there and how we could finally work ourselves out of it. And we did ultimately. Yes, we got to the point where our finances were in pretty good shape. We got an audited financial statement, hired the same auditors who were doing Zale Corporation. The name of the company was Touche, Niven, Bailey & Smart. It was Touche Ross. Now I've forgotten who they are today. And Touche did our books, and we used to get a audited financial statement within 60, 90 days after the end of our year, and we made good financial statements every month. And we really had the place, I thought, in position to do some pretty good educating because we weren't distracted by all of the just the blocking and tackling of running a business. And then we started having some other issues, and the board changed and all that kind of stuff, and the school ultimately disappeared. But had a wonderful experience out there. We had a great board.
When did you take over as chairman of the foundation?
You know, I really don't know, but one of my philosophies of working at Zale Corporation was that, and you have to recognize that I had a great advantage because I was the boss's son. But when I saw something that needed to be done, I did it until somebody told me not to. I kind of operated on the basis of asking for forgiveness and not permission. And I guess when I saw that the foundation needed some direction, I started giving it direction or helping it get direction. And I really don't know, Sheryl, when I became the official chairman, but it was probably after we left Zale Corporation. So I would guess it was probably 1986, 87, something like that. Or maybe when I became chairman at Zale Corporation. Could have been 1981. I became the CEO of Zale Corporation in 1971.
And did you hold that spot until?
Yes, I was CEO until the company sold. And you know that I've lived a charmed life. having the opportunity to work with and for the people that I work with and for. Just, it's a unique experience. M.B. Zale, Ben Lipshy, Al Gardner, Sam Bloom, Bill Zale, Mo Gimp, people of that caliber who were very, very demanding, very precise in their expectations, and yet had the capacity to give people the opportunity to do things on their own, and yet know what they were expected to do, and know that they were going to be evaluated on that was a unique experience. And we had a marvelous business and had a lot of fun in retrospect with building it. It really was. It was just a grand endeavor in almost every way.
How fun to be, how wonderful to be able to say that.
Oh, it was. It was just great. And of course, your Aunt Barbara, she loves to take credit for it, because she said when we got married, the company had 42 stores. When we sold the business, it had about 1,600 stores. So it had to have been her influence.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Wait, how many when you sold?
About 1,600 stores.
Let's move for a few minutes to your family life. You and Barbara married, and how many children do you have?
Well, one of my favorite comedians is a guy by the name of Mel Brooks.
Uh-huh.
You ever heard Mel Brooks' 2,000-year-old man?
Let's hear it.
Have you ever heard his interview with Carl Reiner?
It's been a long time.
Yeah, oh, it's just marvelous. If you have an opportunity, listen to it. Carl Reiner says to him, he says, so you're 2,000 years old. He says, were you married? He said, well, of course. He said, I was married 27 times. In 2,000 years, I was married 27 times. So, what, do you have children? He says, have 614 children. He said, would you believe not one of them calls me? Well, we're so fortunate because all of our kids call us. But our oldest is Barry Zale. Barry's wife, Cindy. We were just over their house last night. They have 6 kids between the two of them. Cindy has 3 by her first marriage. Matthew, Jordan, and Taylor Goldstein. And Barry has 3 by his first marriage. Ben Zale, and Molly Zale, and Betsy Zale. 6 terrific kids. And then we have our daughter Julie Tobolowski, who's married to George Tobolowski. And they have 4 children. I mentioned Catherine a little while ago. She's the oldest of their 4. And then they have a sister, Laura, who lives in Durham, North Carolina. She's employed by an outfit called Teach for America, which is like a domestic Peace Corps. She's a wonderful kid. And then the 2 boys, Adam and Robert. Adam's going to work for us, and Robert's in school at SMU. And then our youngest is Dana Gerard, married to Quinn Gerard, who's a anesthesiologist, practices at Medical City, and they have 3 terrific kids who are all at Highland Park High School. Sarah, who hopefully is going to become an Aggie next year, maybe. I don't know.
You're hoping? Uh-huh.
Well, she's applied for, she's sent in her application. She's been accepted to 3 or 4 different schools already.
Great.
So we're not sure. And then there's Paul, who Dana calls her Zale male, because she says he kind of looks like me, and he's got the Zale Lipshy sense of humor. And then their youngest is Lydia.
Now, how is your family involved in the wider Jewish community now? That's a tough one because I know everyone really is active.
Yeah.
You've set an example for your family to follow.
Well, I know that each of our children have their own activities that they pursue, and Dana and her family are very active at Temple Shalom. The Gerard family have been members there since the very beginning of the congregation. Barry is very much involved with a lot of the things from, he's on the Holocaust, it's not a board, I guess, it's the committee from the University of Texas at Dallas. George is very active with several of the endeavors over at Temple Emmanuel, as is Julie. Barbara, my partner of 53 years, she had been working at the archive room at Temple Emmanuel for, I guess, she'd been volunteering there for as long as I can remember.
She has an honor coming up this spring.
She does. She's getting the first Temple Emmanuel Gerald Klein Award. I think it's the sisterhood that's giving her that. And she was very, very reluctant to accept it. God bless her, that's just not her bag, but she just adored Jerry Klein, as did I. And you know that the week before he passed away, the Saturday night before he died, we were asked to pick him up and take him to a bar mitzvah party.
How nice.
And we spent the whole day with Jerry that weekend, and it was just more fun. He had a great time, and we really did enjoy it. And he'd been to our home for dinner a zillion times, and so forth. He was a marvelous man.
What a happy memory to have.
Yeah.
Are there any reflections that you have on the differences between the Jewish community of Dallas when you were growing up and now?
Well, you know that the Jewish community today, in my judgment, is much, much bigger, as is the whole city. Dallas in 1946, Sheryl, when we moved here, was a big town for me because I came from Wichita Falls. Mm-hmm. So in comparison, it was a big place. But I think in reality, it really wasn't. Today, well, let me step back for you a little bit, because this is one of the things that always interested me. I remember as a kid when my grandmother and grandfather, Zale, lived in Fort Worth. When we would get in a car from Wichita Falls to go to Fort Worth, that was a big deal. You know, my dad would drive us all over there, and we'd probably leave after the store closed, or 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We'd get in the car and we'd drive over and have dinner with Bubby and my grandfather, Sam. We called him Papa. Bubby and Papa Zale. And that was a big deal to make that trip, because the roads weren't that good and so forth. And it was a challenge. Of course, no seat belts in cars or anything like that. You're talking about the 1930s and the early 1940s. And then coming to Dallas, where my Uncle Bill and Aunt Sylvia Zale lived, and my cousins Lou and Jeannie and Teddy were, when we came to Dallas, that was a major trip. You know, it's 140 miles. That was a big deal. I remember when we took our daughter Dana to the airport, when she is going in her junior year of college. She was going to spend it in Paris, France. And we took her to the airport to get on a plane and go to Paris. She was no more excited about going to Paris than I used to get when I got in the car to go to Fort Worth. Mm-hmm. It was kind of, you know, so that things have changed so much. we were so parochial, I guess you could call it. At that time, there wasn't the communication, there wasn't the sophistication. Dallas was just a bigger Wichita Falls to a great extent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, today, we have instant communications every place. It's just such a different time. I used to tell our kids that when I was a little boy during World War II, for us to find out about World War II, we would go to the Saturday movie theater and you'd see a movie tone newsreel in the theater. And it would tell you about something that happened 6 weeks ago, the Battle of the Bulge or Lady Gulf or something like that.
And that was recent. That was up to date.
That was pretty much up to date. Or you'd hear a little something on the radio, and you'd see something in the newspaper. But as kids, we never read the newspaper, and we didn't listen much to the radio. But going to the movies was a big deal. That's how we got our news. Well, when our kids were little, when Barry, Dana, and Julie were small, they had that Vietnam War in their bedroom every night because it was on television. It was a vast difference between what we experienced as kids growing up and today. My God, I mean, it's on the internet before it happens almost. They anticipate things the news has. So
it's practically instantaneous.
Yeah, it is instantaneous, and I guess that this is a diversion from your question. But things have changed so dramatically over the last 50 years. My mother, can I talk about my mother for a minute?
Of course you can.
My mother was a saint. She really was. And after I left Zale Corporation, I used to pick my dad up generally every morning, and I'd bring him to the office with me. And so I'd go over there and I'd sit down in their little breakfast room with them. She had a little television set there. And one morning we're sitting there having breakfast, and the space shuttle was going off. Have I told you the story? I
don't think I've heard it.
And I said to her, Mama, she was about 85 years old, and this had to have been 1990, something like that. And I said to her, Mama, in your 85 years, I mean, my gosh, you've seen the automobile, you've seen the telephone, you've seen television, you've seen jet engines and world travel, and now the space shuttle. I said, by the time we get through with breakfast, that guy's going to have gone around the world. I said, what technology has made the biggest impact on the way you live? She had bad night. She said, indoor plumbing. She said, I'll never forget when we got a toilet inside the house. She said, I was scared to death to go out to that outhouse as a little girl. She said, that's made the biggest impact on the way I live.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
I mean, she just takes it back down to the basics. Is there anything that you can think of that I have forgotten to ask you today, or anything that you would like to add? It's just been a
Cheryl,
remarkable interview.
We'll just have to keep talking, honey, because we'll do this again someday.
I would love to. Let it be just the first of many.
You'll have to remind me what I've said, because I'll forget, I can assure you.
The first of many, Uncle Donnie, and at your convenience, I'd love to have a couple of photos for the archives at Dallas Jewish Historical Society. Okay. One that I'm going to put in our upcoming book that will be a photo of you alone, and then if possible, a copy of this photo. Okay. A picture would be nice to have. Okay. And I just thank you today. Well, you are just so welcome. I thank you, Ruth, for being a part of it. Thank you, Ruth, for being our photographer lady. Well, I love this. I've taken up a lot of your. Some of my lessons from the past, I've already mentioned a couple of these, but one of the fondest memories I have as a little boy was my grandmother, who was Bubby Lipsky, my mother's mother, came to America probably, I figured out, I guess she must have come in the turn of the century also, maybe a little before. And women were not educated, if you recall, in those days in Europe, especially from these poor countries. Shtetls. The Shtetls.
Well, my grandmother, my Bubby Lipshe, learned to read at the same time I did. And we used to sit down and read My Weekly Reader together in Wichita Falls.
Isn't that great?
Oh, God, it was so much fun. And she was so proud of herself when she could learn to read. And it was really fun to do that.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
I've never heard it.
Yeah. Well, of course, your daddy spent a lot of time with our Bubby Lipshe.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He can mimic the accent so well.
Oh, I
you
know.
know?
Oh, I know.
I can't do that kind of thing.
Let me
at
tell
all.
you what, she was just this marvelous, marvelous woman. She was just fantastic. And I guess that we spent a lot of time over there in Wichita Falls. And Bubby and I were very close. And I remember she said when, I guess she got to be in her middle, late 60s or something like that. She was a marvelous cook.
Then. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And she used to say to me, she'd say, "Oi, Donnie," she'd say, "You know I'm no good anymore since I stopped baking." So I started calling her our no good Bubby. And, oh, God, we just had the best time with her. She was just a marvelous woman. She really was. And, oh, I got a lot of stories.
Well, let's see. She moved from Fort Worth.
I guess so. She had
to Wichita Falls at some point because
Goldie was there.
Yes.
You know, she had 4 daughters and 4 sons.
Right.
She had Goldie, Mamie, Ida, and Edna. Well, Goldie, Mamie, and Edna were all in Dallas. I'm sorry, in Wichita Falls.
Wichita Falls.
And Ida, who's married to Uncle Morris Levine, I guess they were living in Lubbock because that's where his stores were. And then she had her 4 sons, which were Harry, who was working for Levine's, and he lived in Albuquerque. And then there was Ben, who lived in Amarillo, who was working for Zale's, and Sidney, who worked in Oklahoma City working for Zale's, and Uncle Bernie, who was a Down syndrome kid, and he was at the Denton School.
And I can tell you a story about that.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of stories about Bernie, just marvelous stories. Larry Burke and I were talking about Bernie yesterday.
Well, I should have known with Bernie. Bernie chose me of all the 14 grandchildren that he thought I was really neat and that I had a special touch with him. You know, I should have known then that God was choosing me to be Emily and Jennifer's mother. Yeah,
Bernie was something else.
He was really terrific. Yeah. Well, anything else in this packet you want to share with us today?
Oh, I got all kinds of stuff in here.
Maybe
I'll tell you. I'll give you a couple of them.
Okay.
I'll tell you one story and then I'll let you go.
Okay, you got a deal.
When I was a kid, working in the store, working for MD, well, at the time, and this goes back to 1939, 1940, something like that, before World War II. Well, we had sold a lot of watches, and all watches at the time were spring wound. No such thing as automatic watches were just coming out, and there was no such thing as an electric watch, electronic watch. Certainly quartz wasn't even invented. And the concept that the watch companies had was that they built the best product that they could at the time. They sent it to the dealer, us, and our job was to time that watch. And if it needed regulating, if it was off, 5 minutes a day or something like that, well, they had a little lever in there that a watchmaker could adjust, and it would make that watch keep correct time. Well, in order to identify which watches worked and which ones didn't, you had to wind them all up. And when you wound up a watch in a jewelry store, you couldn't just wind it up and stick it in the showcase. You had to take a velvet cloth, like so, and you had to take the watch after it's wound. I'll show you what I used to do. Take the watch, and this one's quartz, but you used to wind it with this little stem, and then you would set it. Pull it out and set it. And then I'd have to take this cloth and I have to clean it up real good and put the band back together and so forth. And then you place it back in the showcase so that it was ready to show to a customer. Couldn't have a fingerprint on it or anything like that. Well, the next day you came in and you could real quickly take a look at all the watches, and if they were running properly and you knew it was 12:20 and they all showed 12:20, that was fine. If you had one that was 12:15, you pulled it out. Or if it was, 12:28, you pulled it out too. Well, guess what? The spring wound watch only lasted about 26, 28 hours. So you better be there the same time every day to wind those watches, or you had to reset them. So that taught me a great discipline in showing up to work every day. Because if I didn't show up to wind those bloody watches, I knew that I was going to have to reset them all the next day. Well, God bless my father. He said to me, if you're going to do all that and wind these watches, he said, we could hire a monkey to do that. So here's what you do, is you wind that watch and you look at it, and then you turn it over and you look at the back and it says this watch is $28.50. He says, and I want you to know why this one's $28.50 and that one over there is $32.50, or this one here is $19.95. He says, and then says if you look at it real carefully, you'll begin to understand the differences and why they're priced the way they are and so forth, and what the features are and all this. He says you'll know something about the watch business. Great lesson in merchandising for me. And by the time I guess I was 12 years old, I knew as much about the watch inventory in our stores as anybody in the store.
Well, you'd had the hands-on experience.
Because I had, right, I picked up that product and I looked at it. It taught me an attention to detail that at that young an age that has lasted me forever. That the product has got to be shown properly. You've got to have pride in your merchandise. And I know that we used to say this all the time at Zale Corporation. If we could get our people in the store to show the product with pride and enthusiasm, that it'll generally sell itself, if it's the right product. If it's not the right product, you're not going to sell it regardless. But if you make sure it's shown properly, you'll sell it. And I learned that when I was 10 years old.
That's a great lesson in life.
It was. As I said, it taught you discipline, it taught you attention to detail, it taught you an appreciation for differences in items. And those things are just good business lessons.
And you've used it all these years.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, on that note, let me thank you again, Uncle Donnie, and this has been such a privilege.
It has been
and
fun.
an honor for me, and I thank you
For
again.
me also, thank you so much. What a treat.
Well, I've loved it. Thank you so. I know you've given us a lot of time today.